Las Vegas, 1958, a city built on dreams, dice, and daring stunts. But one gamble that year wouldn't happen on a roulette table or blackjack floor. It would take place in the skies. Two men, a small, modified plane, a mission so insane it felt more like a death wish than a world record attempt. For 64 days and 22 hours, they never touched the ground. No modern avionics, no autopilot, no backup engine, no safety net. Just sheer willpower, a leaking Cessna, and the roar of a 145-horsepower engine. This is the true, incredible, and almost forgotten story of the longest flight in history, a record that still stands over 60 years later, and perhaps will never be broken. The year was 1958. Las Vegas was booming. Frank Sinatra sang in smoky clubs, showgirls danced under neon lights, the casinos pulled in millions. But just south of the main strip stood the Hacienda Hotel, a small, lesser-known casino desperate to grab attention. The management wanted publicity. That's when a hotel mechanic named Robert Tim came forward with a bold idea. He was a Korean War veteran, part-time pilot, and a dreamer. What if we put a plane in the sky with the Hacienda's name on it and just never landed? It sounded impossible. But in Vegas, the impossible often sold tickets. Surprisingly, the hotel said yes. Tim didn't have much, but what he had was determination. He chose a Cessna 172, a dependable four-seater aircraft known for its simplicity. But to fly non-stop for weeks, that required major modifications. Extra fuel tank, a 95-gallon steel tank, was attached to the belly. Access hatch, a trapdoor cut into the pilot floor so supplies could be pulled in mid-flight. Oil system. A custom rig allowed them to refill engine oil while flying. Bed and sink. The co-pilot seat was removed to make a cot and sink combo. Bucket toilet. Crude, but necessary. The plane was a flying tin can, barely comfortable, barely legal. He tried twice in mid-1958. Both attempts failed. The longest he stayed airborne? 17 days. Still not enough. Tim knew he needed help. That's when he called John Cook, a 31-year-old airplane mechanic. Cook had a calm presence and sharp technical skills. He wasn't a daredevil, just curious, intrigued, and willing to endure the madness. With Cook on board, the team made final checks. Supplies were loaded. Dozens of cans of beans, Vienna sausages, water jugs, paper towels, newspapers, fuel hoses, thermoses, chewing gum. They weren't packing for a weekend. They were preparing for months in the sky. On December 4, 1958, at precisely 3:52 p.m., the modified Cessna N9217B lifted off from McCarran Airport in Las Vegas. Tim and Cook would not touch the ground again for 64 days. The aircraft climbed to cruising altitude and headed south toward open desert skies. Their planned flight path: remote areas of California, Arizona, and southern Nevada, where weather was mild and terrain was flat in case of an emergency. For the first few days, morale was high. They played cards, listened to the radio, read newspapers. At night, the glow of Las Vegas was a comforting sight. But it didn't take long for the reality to kick in. Inside the cockpit, cramped, sweltering, noisy, there was no air conditioning, no insulation. By day 5, they had lost track of time. By day 10, their bodies began to ache. They took turns flying and sleeping in 2-hour shifts. One man always had to be at the controls. Cook developed heat rashes. Tim had trouble sleeping, and through it all, the engine never stopped humming. A single mechanical failure, and they would crash. There was no autopilot, no backup battery, no GPS. They were 100% dependent on the tiny machine keeping them aloft. Their lifeline came from below. Every 2 to 3 days, they would rendezvous with a fuel truck, driving a deserted highway near Blythe, California. The truck had a custom steel platform welded to the roof. As the Cessna flew just 20 feet above, Cook would lower a hook attached to a winch. A fuel hose, food supplies, clean water, engine oil, even hot coffee were passed up through the hatch. Cook once said, "Flying 20 feet above a moving truck, it's terrifying. The slightest wind and we crash." They did this 128 times, day, night, rain, wind. It was part flying, part dancing, part survival. By day 25, the strain started to show. The cabin smelled of sweat and canned food. Their clothes were stained and stiff. The walls dripped condensation. Both men became irritable. They stopped joking, stopped reading, stopped listening to the radio. Sleep deprivation set in. They hallucinated, argued, fell silent. Cook later said, "The sky became a prison. I wasn't flying, I was surviving." Then came the first disaster. Around day 36, the generator failed. No electricity, no lights, no heater, no electric fuel pump. The aircraft became dangerously cold at night. Temperatures dropped near freezing. They were forced to use a hand-cranked flashlight to see at night. And now, every drop of fuel had to be pumped manually, hundreds of feet in the air. The belly tank's fuel line froze once, forcing an emergency workaround. The engine began losing power. They checked it daily, mid-flight, mid-air. Still, they flew on. They had done it. The record 50 days and 7 hours in the air was officially broken. The Hacienda Hotel celebrated. Radio stations announced the news. Newspapers across the country ran the headline, "World record smashed, the flight that wouldn't end." But in the sky, there was no celebration. Cook looked over at Tim, expecting relief. Instead, Tim muttered, "Now, let's make sure no one ever beats us." Cook was stunned. His back ached. His hands were raw. His nerves frayed. "We've already won," he said. "Let's go home." But Tim wasn't ready. He wanted to fly until the record was impossible to match. Cook had a choice: argue or endure. He chose to endure. What followed were some of the darkest days of the entire flight. They had surpassed every known limit, but they kept going. Day 53, Day 55, Day 57. The days blurred. Their sense of time collapsed. They stopped writing in the logbook consistently. Meals became guesswork. Their sleep fragmented and frantic. Tim's voice grew distant. Cook's temper flared. They argued over supplies. They argued over altitude. They argued over nothing. And when they weren't arguing, they said nothing at all. Only the engine spoke. Cook began hallucinating. He saw shadows crawling along the wing at night. Once, he reached for a cup that wasn't there. Tim, too, began to drift into delusion. He stared out the window for hours, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I think I saw my son," he whispered once. The Cessna had become a prison in the sky. There was no fresh air, no standing upright, no privacy. Just two broken men, trapped in 37 feet of metal, suspended in silence. On day 60, disaster nearly ended it all. They hit turbulence during a fuel pass over the desert. Wind slammed the plane sideways. The hose whipped through the air and missed. Cook scrambled to reel it in, his fingers bleeding, arms shaking. Then, the belly tank's hose snapped. Fuel sprayed across the cabin. One spark, and they would have gone up in flames. Cook threw towels over the soaked floor. Tim steadied the plane with trembling hands. No radio call, no panic, just survival, again. That night, they sat in silence. Neither man moved. Neither man spoke. The sky outside was starless. The air smelled of fuel and sweat. Tim finally turned and looked at Cook. "Let's go home," he said softly. Cook didn't respond. He just nodded. The next morning, they turned the plane toward Las Vegas. On February 7, 1959, the Cessna 172 emerged from the desert sky, creaking and wobbling. Word had spread. Crowds gathered at McCarran Field, reporters, hotel guests, family, strangers. The tiny aircraft approached the runway like a relic from another world. At 8:52 a.m., its wheels kissed the earth, ending the most extreme endurance flight in aviation history. 64 days, 22 hours, 19 minutes. They had done it, but they didn't step out in triumph. They had to be helped from the cockpit. Legs stiff, bodies skeletal, faces hollow. Tim had lost 30 pounds. Cook looked like he'd aged 10 years. But they were alive. Photographers snapped. The Hacienda handed them checks. Officials certified the flight. Cook said nothing. Tim offered only a tired smile. Their victory didn't feel like glory. It felt like survival. For a few weeks, they were celebrities. Radio interviews, newspaper profiles, public appearances. The story inspired awe and confusion. Why would anyone do this? How did they survive? Could it ever happen again? But in time, the world moved on. Tim returned to work at the hotel. Cook faded from public view. The headlines faded, but the record remained. The Cessna N92-7B was retired, weathered, worn, but legendary. Today it rests in the McCarran Aviation Museum in Las Vegas. Visitors walk past it without knowing the full story. To most, it's just an old plane with faded paint and dusty wings. But to those who know, it's sacred. It's the aircraft that defied the limits of man and machine. The plane may be grounded, the men may be gone, but the story still flies. Not just in museums, but in every dream that dares to go too far. 64 days in the air, two men who refuse to come down, a record no one dares to chase. Because some legends were never meant to be broken.